Hello, dear listener. Before we begin, welcome back to Boring History for Sleep and a warm greeting to any newcomers. Tonight we slip into the soft glow of dawn light streaming across a Song Dynasty silk quality control workshop, where even the shadows hum with quiet purpose. You might think you're here for excitement, but let's be honest, you're really just here to relax. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're ready to drift off to the soothing hum of ancient looms. And while you're at it, let us know your location and local time in the comments below. Now let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to a pale wash of gold spilling through latticed windows, and the world outside still whispers in half dreams. Inside, the workshop breathes with gentle clicks and sighs, wooden beams stretching, looms awakening, and silken threads flickering like morning dew on a spider's web. You step forward, your sandals whispering against the stone floor, and inhale the faint tang of heated water where freshly boiled cocoons wait to yield their treasure. Even at this hour, the air carries a hush of urgency, because here in the year 1105, quality is not just an abstract ideal, but a matter of imperial pride. During the Song Dynasty, 960 to 1279, China produced over half the world's silk, prized by emperors and traders alike for its luster and strength seamlessly woven into every garment and tapestry. Historians still debate the exact scale of these operations, but their legacy hums through every strand. You drift past low tables lined with baskets of gleaming cocoons, each one plump and glistening. A veteran reel master kneels beside a shallow vat, brushing stray bits of pupa away with a soft willow whisk. You notice how she hums a single monotonous note, supposedly to calm the silkworm's spirits and encourage longer, straighter filaments. Fringe beliefs hold that if you break that chant, the thread might thin or snap mid-reel, cursing the entire batch. You're not sure whether you believe such things, but you can't help the tiny shiver that trickles down your spine. After all, you are only human, and even the most pragmatic artisan might glance over their shoulder at an empty corner. A breeze drifts through, carrying the scent of mulberry leaves drying in the courtyard, and the distant echo of a waterwheel turning. You trace those silkworm farms in your mind, picturing rows of neatly pruned trees and families tending each leaf with quiet devotion. The workshop itself feels like a living organism, a network of humming combs, pivoting gears and coiling filaments that pulse in unison. Lantern shadows dance on the walls as day begins its slow climb, and you can almost taste the anticipation in the air. You pause at a low platform where two apprentices gently tug a single silk filament between their fingertips, testing its tensile strength. The filament strains, gleams, then sighs into perfect elasticity. One apprentice nods solemnly, her eyes reflecting disciplined pride. You recognise that tiny ritual as a cornerstone of quality control. Every warp and weft must meet the court's exacting standards for tensile consistency. Otherwise, a single flawed thread might unravel an entire brocade pattern, and no one wants to explain that to a eunuch censor. The workshop master steps forward, his long sleeves brushing the ground, and raises a single finger to tap the table. Even his stillness feels like motion. You sense the weight of expectation settle around you. This is no mere cottage industry. Imperial commissioners will soon scrutinise the finished skeins, comparing them to an unseen perfection whispered down through generations. Yet here you stand at the threshold of the day's labour, caught between the soft echo of tradition and the crisp possibility of discovery. You rub your eyes and smile to yourself, recalling that this morning ritual has barely shifted in centuries. Beyond the windows, the world is waking in staccato calls of vendors and the distant clang of market gates. But here, within these walls, time flows slower, measured in the gentle dragging of silk across polished wood and the measured breaths of artisans at work. You lean back, feeling every strand of tension in your body unknot under the quiet choreography. With a soft exhale, you settle in to watch the next reels begin their silent dance. The ceremonial first drop of silk into warm water, the careful threading through fine needles, the slow, deliberate turn of a bamboo reel, all gestures steeped in ritual, precision, and a touch of superstition. As you breathe alongside the workshop, the boundary between observer and participant blurs, and you almost believe you could step forward, finger a strand, and feel its whispered history vibrate beneath your skin. You lean closer as the real master guides a freshly boiled cocoon toward a whirring wooden drum, and silk begins to unfurl in a single silvery ribbon. Each filament glistens like morning dew, catching stray sunbeams that slip past the shutters and weaving them into 1,000 tiny rainbows. You can almost hear the silk whispering secrets as it unspools, an intimate ASMR of wood against fibre, water droplets pattering back into the vat, and the soft hum of a century-old mechanism humming along like a contented beast. You reach out, fingertips hovering mere millimetres above those drifting strands without actually touching, lest you disturb their perfect flow. The reel is foot-powered, an ingenious contraption that predates European reel technology by centuries, and it relies on your body's natural rhythm to maintain constant tension. It's said that song artisans perfected this foot treadle design around the 11th century, optimizing speed without sacrificing strand integrity. You find it oddly soothing that your own pulse could orchestrate such a delicate unfolding of nature's finest fibre. As the reel turns, you spot a tiny bobbin shimmering under the spindle, gathering 20 or 30 filaments spun together. This silk thread will eventually be plied into warp threads thicker and stronger than human hair, yet soft enough to brush your cheek without resistance. When you hold a skein later, you'll notice it's nearly as fine as the edge of a coin, a testament to the reel master's careful calibration. Silk's tensile strength is remarkable, stronger by weight than steel, they say, and it's what let caravans haul precious bolts thousands of miles along the Silk Road without ripping at every bump. You can practically see the camels stumbling through Gansu as you watch these threads coil gently around the bobbin. You inhale, catching the faint scent of heated water vapour mingling with a crisp tang of bamboo that was recently oiled to keep the reel's axles smooth. There's a slight undertone of something else too, a resinous aroma whispered to be from crushed lotus blossoms mixed into the water. Fringe lore insists this floral infusion prevents the threads from tangling by appeasing the silkworm's spirits. Whether that's true or not, the effect is undeniably pleasant, and you imagine imperial courtiers sniffing collars scented with this floral note as they parade through Kaifeng's palace halls. If you breathe deep enough, you might even swear you can hear a faint lotus-scented echo. A sharp tap echoes as the assistant replaces a spent bobbin with an empty one, and the reel's speed shifts imperceptibly. You feel a tiny vibration under your foot where the master gently presses on the treadle, guiding the rhythm with practiced precision. Your own heartbeat sinks, if only for a moment, and you're struck by how human and mechanical motion converge here. Some early Europeans called this setup a silk engine, marvelling that no animal, no mule or horse, was needed to spin the precious threads. It's a small revolution hidden in plain sight. Your eye follows a single filament as it arcs towards shadowy corners of the workshop, where sunlight does not dare to go there. Low shelves hold jars of powdered alum and vinegar solution, ready to be added to the water to help the silk adhere in the reeling process. You've heard that if too much alum is added, the silk can stiffen and lose its signature drape. Too little, and it won't bind properly, causing countless headaches down the line. It's a delicate chemical balance, almost alchemy, that combines empirical wisdom with a dash of trial and error. You wonder if modern textile engineers would scoff at this empirical approach. Yet here it has endured for generations. Across from you, an apprentice taps a thin metal rod against a finished bobbin, eliciting a clear bell-like tone. This sonic quality test is a little-known practice. If the rod's ring is pure and steady, it signals that the threads are free of irregular twists or hidden flaws. If the tone warbles or cuts short, they'll feed the filament back through the vat and start over. You try to stifle a laugh at how this sounds like they're auditioning silk for a musical ensemble, yet in its own way, it's a method built on human intuition and sensitive hearing. No gilded manuscript required. You shift to examine the water vat itself, where hundreds of cocoons bob like small pale buoys. The water is kept at just the right temperature, warm enough to loosen the gummy sericin that binds the threads, yet cool enough to avoid weakening the fibres. You've read that the ideal range is between 60 and 70 degrees Celsius, which makes you appreciate how challenging it must have been to maintain that in a stone courtyard workshop 2 millennia ago. One wrong splash of cold water and an entire cocoon batch could fail, leaving behind nothing but brittle, threadless husks. Nearby, an old artisan pauses her treadle, adjusts her embroidered sleeve and cups her hands around her mouth to coax a faint chant toward the vat. Si liao, she murmurs, as if encouraging the cocoons themselves to yield their best silk. You aren't sure whether this is a vestige of Taoist practice, or simply a calming ritual passed down through families. Fringe scholars suggest this chant mimics the silkworm's earlier silking sounds, encouraging a smoother release. You find yourself wondering if, somewhere in the marble halls of history, emperors ever paused to consider which notes truly spun the finest threads. A sudden swirl of breeze carries a faint rustle from the courtyard beyond, the plum trees shaking off a stray blossom or two, petals tumbling across the flagstones. You glance up, catching a petal on your sleeve, and feel its soft silkiness against your palm, an accidental reminder that nature's own silk is fleeting, while the human-made variety endures. You brush it away and return to the reel, which has now produced a dozen perfect bobbins of unspooled silk, each ready for the next stage of inspection and dye. In this moment, you appreciate the paradox of silk reeling. It's both mechanized and meditative, clinical yet ritualistic. The very act of unspooling finds itself at the intersection of natural wonder, scientific precision, and human imagination. And as you stand, toes curled around the foot pedal, you feel a calm wash over you, carried on the melody of the drum-like reel and the lilt of distant chant. Without realizing it, you're holding your breath as the reel slows, and the master taps the spindle to signal a perfect batch. The apprentice nods, exchanging bobbins with a flourish, and you exhale. The world seems quieter now, as though the silence itself is made of silk threads, draping over everything in soft folds. You lean back, satisfied and oddly drowsy, ready for the next whisper of process to lull you even deeper into this cushioned dream. You step deeper into the workshop's hushed heart, where the reeling masters convene around low wooden vats, their robes whispering across the stone floor. Here, artisans who have spent decades coaxing silk from cocoons perform rituals that blend precision with a reverence for unseen forces. The masters' faces are serene but focused, their movements so practiced that each gesture seems etched into muscle memory, like the turning of a page in a manuscript you've read 1,000 times. You feel drawn into their orbit, as though each step you take brings you closer to an ancient secret they guard in soft whispers. In a semicircle, 3 masters stand before shallow, steam-wreathed basins. One dips a slender bamboo rod into a vat of warm water, then lifts it slowly, letting droplets trace perfect arcs before splashing back. The second extends a single filament between thumb and forefinger, rolling it gently into a circle on the palm. The third watches both, nodding in silent appraisal. This choreography repeats in deliberate sequence, dip, roll, inspect, until each master signals readiness with a barely perceptible nod. It's a precise ballet of motion, performed without spoken words, and you can't help but adopt its tempo in your own breathing. You recall that during the Song dynasty, silk reeling became a regulated imperial monopoly, and only officially sanctioned masters could operate the best workshops. Their skills were documented in treatises like the Taiping Huanyu Ji, which praised the importance of consistent temperature and artisanal technique. You lean closer, drawn by the faint hiss of steam and the tiny click as damp silk snaps over bamboo. The mainstream historical fact is that Song authorities maintained strict oversight of silk production to protect state revenue and reputation, a policy that kept quality reliably high and cash flowing into the treasury. A master places a small porcelain dish on a low stool and deposits 3 neat loops of newly reeled silk. He covers the dish with a sheet of gauze and places it atop a low brazier, watching the steam rise in gentle spirals. This, you learn, is a preliminary dry test, meant to assess sheen and dryness before any further handling. If the silk beads with the moisture or looks chalky, it's back to the vat for another round. Your fingertips itch to brush the gauze aside, to glimpse that first shimmer of lustre, but you restrain yourself, respecting the silent gravity of the moment. Then comes the ritual chanting, low, sustained tones that might belong to a forgotten liturgy. The masters murmur in unison, voices weaving through the workshop like a warm cloak. Scholars still wonder whether this chant originated in Taoist incantations seeking elemental harmony, or if it's a practical mnemonic to maintain consistent timing in multi-step processes. You can almost feel the vibration humming through the wooden beams overhead, as though the building itself hums back at the human song. Nearby, an apprentice lights a slender stick of sandalwood, its smoke trailing in lazy spirals around hanging silk skeins. The fragrance drifts into the vats, and you notice how a hint of vanilla rounds out the sandalwood's crisp smoke. Fringe lore suggests that such aromatic rituals encourage the silk's fibres to align more smoothly, resulting in fabric with a subtler sheen. You smile at the idea. Perhaps it's no more fanciful than modern perfumers adding fixatives, yet the notion feels delightfully poetic. The masters rotate toward the vats, transferring hot water from one basin to another, calibrating temperature by ear and touch. One places a bare fingertip at the surface, gauging warmth, while another taps the side of the vat with a metal rod, listening for a dull thud that signals just how dense the water feels. It's a blend of science and sensory intuition that you find mesmerizing. Centuries before mercury thermometers, these artisans relied on practice, touch and ear to keep temperatures between 70 and 80 degrees Celsius. You imagine that in colder months, they might crowd together, shoulders brushing, to warm their fingers enough for these delicate tests. As the reeling begins in earnest, the masters drift to individual bobbins, each standing sentinel before a spinning drum. They thread the first filaments through a fine eyelet, adjusting tension with a small wooden wedge. The spindle spins, and silk pours off the cocoon like liquid light. You watch enthralled as one master arcs a hand gracefully above the drum, guiding the filament's path without ever brushing it. Each movement is minimal, almost invisible, but utterly indispensable. A breath here, a tilt there, and the resulting thread is perfectly uniform. You notice the master's robes, long, plain and dyed a soft grey blue, which seem to absorb workshop light rather than reflect it. A rumour flits through your mind that only those who wore robes dipped in indigo twice could earn the title of reeling master. Fringe scholars debate if this was an actual requirement or merely a symbolic tale spun by jealous apprentices. You look at those robes now and wonder whether they truly warded off impurities, or if they simply marked rank in an age without formal uniforms. Between reeling cycles, the masters pause to inspect bobbins under small magnifying lenses, set in bronze stands. They tilt the lens just so, catching stray fibres or tiny knots invisible to the naked eye. When you lean in, the world under that magnifying glass seems to glow, an entire universe woven from the thinnest strands. It's as if you're peering into the very essence of luxury, distilled into delicate fibres. The cycle repeats. Thread, inspect, adjust, chant. Steam rises in gentle clouds, mingling with sandalwood smoke and earthy lotus scent. The rhythm carries you forward. Your eyelids grow heavy as you inhale the soft chorus of ritual and machinery. You begin to feel adrift, suspended in the workshop's calm cadence, as though time itself is unspooling like silk on the reel. You realize you've been holding your breath, straining to catch every nuance of movement. Now you let it go and feel a wave of release. The masters exchange a final nod, signalling the end of this phase. They dip bobbins into cold water, setting the newly reeled threads to rest and solidify their sheen. The transition from hot to cold is so swift you imagine the silk fibre size in relief. A single ribbon of reeled silk drapes from a hook overhead, quivering in the breeze from an open window. It glints white, soft as a cloud, and you feel an irresistible urge to reach out, except you know that touching now would mar its perfection. So instead, you close your eyes and let the image etch itself in your mind. The ribbon, the flicker of sandalwood smoke, the soft murmur of chant, and the gentle hum of human mastery enshrined in every strand. You stand there a moment longer, savouring the hush, then slip away toward the next station, your senses tingling as though wrapped in a cocoon of calm. The masters resume their silent vigil, bathed in lantern light and the quiet glow of morning, guardians of a craft that threads together nature, science and ritual into the fabric of empire. You step across the cool stone threshold into the next chamber, a quieter space, cloaked in the heavy hush that always follows serious inspection. This is the silk thread quality assessment room, and the energy here is different. It's no longer about movement, not about reeling or boiling or even the rhythm of chant. No, here it's about stillness, about looking harder and longer than anyone else dares to. You've just arrived at the Song Dynasty's answer to a quality control lab, though instead of clipboards and fluorescent lights, it's lacquered bamboo trays and morning light filtering through rice paper screens. The air is so still it practically settles on your skin like a gauzy veil. A few low benches line the walls, each holding spools of newly reeled silk. At a long central table, 3 silk inspectors sit hunched, eyes narrowed, hands steady. They resemble monks at their calligraphy practice, each thread examined with a calm so profound it feels spiritual. One woman picks up a spool and pulls it taut between her fingers, not to snap it, but to study its consistency. A small candle flickers beside her, its flame dancing with every fibre twist, illuminating even the tiniest defect. A perfectly spun thread remains still. An uneven one wobbles like a lyre under pressure. They work in silence, broken only by the occasional sharp click of bamboo fingers tapping a bowl, a sign of rejection. When you hear that sound, your stomach drops just a little, even though you're not the one who reeled it. That tap means weeks of work discarded, destined to become filler or cord or worse, sold off to travelling merchants who don't know any better. No imperial commission will ever touch it again. You lean in closer to one of the trays, trying not to breathe too hard. Each skein has been laid out in rows, labelled with a brush-dabbed tag. The ink is still fresh on some of them, curling at the edges where moisture hasn't yet evaporated. Inspectors run their fingertips lightly along each skein, judging not just by sight but by feel, how the thread slips between skin ridges, whether it snags or purrs. In the song court, consistency wasn't just admired, it was demanded. An uneven thread could ruin an entire robe, and an imperial robe ruined by inferior silk? Well, let's just say that heads didn't always stay attached. But here's something you might not expect. Even in this rigid inspection space, there's a hint of mischief. One inspector, younger, sharper-eyed than the rest, pulls a single rogue strand from a rejected skein and loops it around her finger, knotting it into a tiny bracelet. She tucks it under her sleeve, a faint smirk playing at her lips. It's a small rebellion, or maybe just a way of saying not all failures are wasted. You get the sense that over the years these women have developed their own secret taxonomy of silk, not all of it written down. At a side table sits a curious tool, a polished bronze ring used to test thread diameter. You watch as an inspector feeds a thread through its centre. If it passes through smoothly without resistance, it's deemed too thin and discarded. If it sticks, it's too thick. Only those threads that brush through just right, like a silk Goldilocks, are accepted for elite weaving. The bronze ring has been warmed slightly by the sun, and you note how the inspector occasionally touches it to her cheek, using her own skin as a barometer for ambient temperature. Machines, Please, in this room, the body is the instrument. There's also a stack of translucent mulberry paper off to one side, where inspectors blot thread with water to check dye absorption potential. They'll mark any discoloration with a tiny red X in the margin, a sign that the thread has impurities that might cause uneven dye uptake. A fringed tidbit whispers in your ear. Some inspectors would chew a sliver of the silk to detect bitterness, which might suggest leftover sericin or contamination. Imagine that. Silk sommeliers. You try to picture a song official describing thread notes the way a sommelier does tannins. Ah yes, this one hints of magnolia bark and disappointment. As you observe, one inspector lifts a spindle to her ear and flicks it gently. That same bell-like tone again. Here too, resonance tells a truth that the eye can't always catch. A clean, clear note means the thread is evenly wound, free of slack or tangles. A flat note? Rewind and start again. They've learned to trust sound just as much as vision or touch. It's oddly comforting to know that in this ancient system, all your senses are valued, even hearing, which gets overlooked in most modern quality checks. A papery flutter draws your attention to the far corner of the room, where a wooden screen stands beside a window cracked slightly open. A tiny breeze passes through, sending inspection tags dancing. One tag flits loose and lands near your foot. You bend to pick it up. Golden thread, batch 17. It smells faintly of vinegar and ink, and you imagine the silk it mark gliding through some loom, destined to become the hem of a court lady's robe or the lining of an imperial scroll case. Historians still debate how standardised the Song dynasty's silk grading system truly was. Some argue for rigorous empire-wide protocols complete with documentation and stamps of approval. Others believe much was left to local discretion, passed down through guilds and families. You suspect it was both. Strict enough to enforce imperial pride, but human enough to leave room for quirks. After all, silk might be soft, but its system was stitched together by personalities. Sharp-eyed women, perfectionist elders, rebels with thread bracelets. As the afternoon light tilts and softens, the inspectors begin to stack approved skeins in lacquered boxes lined with woven grass mats. A gentle sigh escapes the eldest inspector as she closes the lid on the final box. The room seems to exhale with her, silk stored like treasure awaiting its next journey. Whether to dye vats, looms, or royal caravans bound for trade routes you can barely imagine. And now the quiet returns, heavier than before. You step back, barely making a sound, careful not to disturb the sanctity of this space. There's something monastic about it all, something that lingers on your skin long after you've left. You brush invisible threads from your sleeve and step toward the dying house, where the colours of silk are waiting to bloom. You cross the courtyard beneath the slanted light of late morning, your feet echoing against sun-warmed stone. The scent changes as you approach the dying house. No more the crisp tang of steam and silk, but instead a rich, complicated perfume of crushed leaves, fermented minerals, and something sweet, almost syrupy. A dye house never hides its business. Even with your eyes closed, you'd know you've arrived by the heady embrace of colour waiting to be born. The dyeing chamber isn't a single room, but a warren of small open-air alcoves, each sheltering a particular process under tiled roofs and hanging reeds. You duck into one, and the shadows shift cool around your shoulders. Before you stands a low row of clay vats, each deep enough to swallow a whole bolt of fabric. The rims are stained in rainbows, sapphire, rust red, pale jade, ink black. This is where silk transforms, not just in hue, but in worth, in meaning. A dull thread becomes court wear. A simple weave becomes status. Colour here is currency. A young dyer greets you with a quick bow and lifts a thin rod to stir a vat. You peer over the edge and see a swirl of indigo clouds rising from the depths like dream ink. The rod dips again, disappearing into liquid mystery. He turns to you, gestures toward a bundle of silk threads hanging from a bamboo rack. "Almost ready," he whispers, as if speaking louder might chase away the pigment. Silk dyeing in the Song dynasty was as much chemistry as it was poetry. The formulas were recorded meticulously. often inherited through family lines, guarded like recipes for immortality. Mainstream historical records describe how natural dyes, indigo, safflower, gardenia, pomegranate skin, were combined with mineral mordants like alum or iron to coax rich lasting colour. Some techniques demanded boiling, others relied on fermentation, allowing bacteria to unlock deeper hues. The result? An empire clothed in botanical alchemy. The young dyer lifts a skein from the vat with long wooden tongs. It emerges shimmering a dark blue-green, dripping thickly like it's been pulled from the heart of a wave. The silk hangs, steaming, while he swings it gently like a pendulum to prevent spotting. You watch as droplets hit the stone in perfect rhythm. You're mesmerised by the way the colour continues to deepen as the air touches it, oxidising like an apple left on a cutting board. One moment, pale sky, the next, a thunderhead blue. The process isn't fast. Good silk dyeing takes time, patience, and lots of dipping. Once isn't enough. The silk is plunged again and again and again, sometimes a dozen times, each round layering pigment into the thread's very soul. Dyers whisper that silk has moods, and you must match them. Force it, and the colour turns brash. Treat it gently, and it will gift you something luminous. There's a saying you overhear. Colour is not painted, it is persuaded. In the next alcove, two older women prepare the mordants, boiling a sour mix of pomegranate skin and vinegar over a clay stove. The steam stings your nose, but they breathe it in like perfume. This one's for yellow silk, one says, eyeing a bucket of golden skeins soaking nearby. Her hands, stain mustard from years of contact, look as though they themselves have turned into pigment tools. She shows you how the silk must rest for a full moon cycle to set the yellow just right. Anything shorter and the colour bleeds at the first wash. It's slow, yes, but there's no rushing dignity. Then there's the fringe tidbit that makes your eyebrows rise. Certain colours were believed to affect the wearer's emotions. Scholars debated whether it was superstition or proto-psychology. Yellow was thought to induce clarity. Red, when dyed using madder root, might ignite confidence or restlessness. Indigo brought peace unless over-fermented, in which case it could make the wearer overly passive. You glance back at the blue skeins and wonder, did the Empress wear indigo when she needed to negotiate? Did the Minister of Rights quietly switch to grey when facing imperial audits? As you move deeper into the dyeing maze, you encounter a vat sealed under a wooden lid bound with rope. A sign hangs above it, "Do not open." Naturally you want to open it. A nearby apprentice catches your wandering gaze and smiles. "The black," he explains. "It takes a month to settle. We check it by smell, not sight." He lifts a small hole plug and sniffs. Not yet. He replaces it with reverence. The black dye was made from iron rust, walnut shells and nightshade, and had to be matured like wine. A well-made black was a symbol of authority. Judges, magistrates, and certain scholars wore it when plain silk wouldn't do. Historians still debate which region of the Song dynasty produced the most vivid dye colours. Hangzhou claimed supremacy, boasting access to superior water purity, while dyers in Sichuan argued their highland flora yielded brighter tones. Some even argue that the real secret lay not in ingredients or geography, but in the artisan's hands. The subtle pressure of squeeze and twist, the angle of immersion, the breath held before lifting the skein. All these things a recipe can't capture, but a lifetime of touch remembers. At the far end of the house, dyed silk dries under the open sky, draped like prayer flags between poles. The wind flutters them just enough to keep them from creasing. You walk beneath them slowly, arms at your sides, your head tilted up to watch crimson, gold, blue, and green ripple like water. You've never felt smaller, but also never more at peace. A single strand breaks loose and floats downward. You reach out, catch it on your sleeve. The thread is light as breath, but the colour, oh the colour, has the weight of centuries. You find yourself smiling at the apprentice who climbs the ladder to secure the drifting strand's siblings. She's whistling a tune you don't recognize, but it fits. There's something gentle about the scene. No one is shouting, rushing, or worrying. They know the dye will dry, the silk will remember the hands that coaxed it into beauty, and in time the colour will tell its own story to whoever wears it next. A final corner catches your eye. A small altar with a bowl of water, a mirror, and a few dried leaves. It's a shrine to the colour spirits, you're told. Some dyers still whisper to the vats before the first dip, offering a breath, a word, a promise. Whether it's a prayer or just tradition, no one skips it. In this place, belief and practice twine like threads in a braid. You step away slowly, glancing once more at the drying lines, the stone-stained floors, the swirling vats, and the dyed fingertips that move with the care of artists, scientists, and monks. Colour, you now understand, is not just added, it is earned. The warmth of the dye house still clings to your sleeves as you walk into the adjacent pavilion, where the walls are covered, not with silks, but with diagrams, woven samples, and spidery calligraphy. The weaver's hall. There's a shift in energy again, a quiet pulse of tension you feel before you even see the looms. Something about this space is focused, tuned, held taut like a bowstring. You pause to take it in. The floor is worn smooth by decades of pacing feet. And from the rafters hang lengths of patterned silk so fine, the designs seem painted rather than woven. You lean close to one, cranes in mid-flight, feathers etched with gold thread, clouds curling beneath their wings in perfect symmetry. But no paintbrush ever touched this. It's all warp and weft, engineered by sheer patience and terrifying precision. Here, silk weaving is a kind of sorcery, and every weaver you see is a practitioner with the patience of stone and the precision of a mathematician. You pass rows of hand looms, each one anchored to the floor with thick wooden legs, the tops bristling with threads so dense they look like harp strings waiting for a player. Some are simple treadle looms, but others are more complex. Early draw looms, precursors to the jacquard loom, capable of weaving pictorial designs and complex brocades that could drive a lesser mind to madness. A senior weaver gestures for you to sit beside him. His loom hums as he works, feet tapping the treadles below, hands flicking the shuttle back and forth. His daughter stands on a small platform behind him, gently lifting and lowering a series of cords. This is the drawboy system, where a helper manipulates the warp threads from above to create patterns in the cloth below. It's a two-person ballet, one controlling the logic, the other the rhythm. He nods to a section of fabric just completed, still warm from the tension of weaving. You run your fingers across it. Even with closed eyes, you can feel the pattern. Raised dragon scales, textured just enough to catch the light differently as you move your hand. And then he shows you the math. Oh yes, there's math. Stacked on his bench are pattern books filled with gridded diagrams, each box a knot, each row a decision. If you thought weaving was simply passing thread over and under, you've severely underestimated song ingenuity. You marvel at how geometric precision births something so emotional. Historians point to this era as the golden age of silk design, when tapestry techniques, brocading and compound weaves reached new heights. Some records even describe imperial garments requiring thousands of pickup motions per day, with teams of weavers working shifts just to complete a robe within a year. Not a week. A year. And you thought your group projects took forever. In the far corner, a quieter scene unfolds. Two women seated at a smaller loom, working on a gauzy fabric so light it barely casts a shadow. This is luo, a type of open weave silk favoured in summer, known for its breathability and shimmer. They move in near silence, except for the soft creak of wood and the occasional hiss of silk thread tightening under the reed. You lean closer and catch a fringed tidbit. One of the women has tied a tiny clay weight to her shuttle in the shape of a peach. It's not strictly necessary, she says with a smile, but it balances the movement better. And it's cute. You can't argue with that. As you walk, you catch snippets of quiet instruction from masters to apprentices. Mind your selve edges, count aloud every fifth row, don't blink during the pattern change. It's relentless, this discipline, but there's kindness in it too. Ritual passed through generations. You hear someone mention that master weavers often selected their successors not by skill alone, but by patience. Hands can be taught, they say. Temperament cannot. You're starting to believe it. One loom you pass has been abandoned for a moment, its shuttle resting mid-flight. You resist the urge to touch, knowing that the tiniest bump could ruin alignment. The tension of a loom is a fragile thing. If silk remembers hands, looms remember hesitation. You pause by a chalkboard scrawled with a diagram of a phoenix. This is not doodling. This is the planned next commission. An imperial robe ordered for a spring festival. The feathers alone will require 3 types of thread. Plain silk for the body, gold-wrapped thread for the wingtips, and a technique called unbrocade, cloud weaving for the background. You try to imagine wearing something so involved and then chuckle softly. You wore a shirt inside out for half a day last week and barely noticed. Historians still debate whether such exquisite textiles were actually worn in everyday palace life or reserved only for ceremonial use. Some scrolls suggest emperors and high-ranking officials changed robes several times a day, each tailored to specific events and seasons. Others argue much of this was idealized in official records to project grandeur. But here, amid the looms, you suspect the truth is somewhere in between. Function wrapped in performance, art disguised as necessity. A young girl brushes past you carrying a tray of dyed threads, indigo, vermilion, chrysanthemum gold. She's heading to the preparation bench where the warping begins. Watching her stretch the threads across the long frame, you realise the act of weaving begins long before the loom is even touched. Warp threads must be perfectly aligned, evenly tensioned, and weighted with polished stones to prevent slack. It's a meditative choreography that sets the rhythm for everything that follows. And just when you think you've seen it all, one final curiosity. A stack of bamboo tubes filled with crushed moth cocoons. These are not for weaving. They're a weaver's secret stash, dusted into powder, mixed with rice paste, and applied as a sizing agent to give certain fabrics more structure. One elder tells you they call it ghost glue because it disappears after steaming. You file that one away under things you'll never unsee. You linger as long as you dare, entranced by the way hands and minds mesh with machines. But eventually the rhythm of the shuttle slows, the looms fall silent, and you find yourself guided gently toward the exit. Someone hands you a small square of brocade, a practice sample. The dragons are upside down and a little wonky, but charming all the same. You tuck it into your sleeve like a secret. Outside, the sound of the looms fades behind you. In their place rises the echo of your own heartbeat, steady as a treadle. You move on toward the next building, already wondering how on earth they handle all the finished fabric. Spoiler alert, it's not with a filing cabinet. The workshop's looms fade behind you, and with them the rhythmic click-clack of thread-finding form. What replaces it is something quieter but no less vital, a hush filled with rustling paper, murmured measurements, and the crisp snip of blades. You've arrived at the patterning and cutting studio, where bolts of painstakingly woven silk are turned from endless river to wearable art. This is where the silk meets its destiny. Or, if someone messes up, where all that delicate work dies a very expensive death. You step through a wooden threshold and the scent changes again. Here it's wood glue, rice paste and ink. Light pours through paper windows, illuminating stacks of parchment pattern templates and tailor's tools that look both ancient and oddly familiar. Chalks, measuring ropes, flat stones, brass rulers with teeth like little dragons. There are no looms here, but the tension is still thick. Only now it's creative tension, the sort that turns silk and measurements into myth. A master tailor nods to you as you enter, one eyebrow cocked like a question mark. She's bent over a low table, her fingers tracing an outline on the parchment. The paper is stiff with use, and every line carries weight, literal and figurative. Pattern templates are inherited, like heirlooms. Adjusting them isn't done lightly. The measurements come from someone important, a magistrate perhaps, or the daughter of a local merchant recently elevated through civil service. You watch as she lifts a yard of cobalt brocade and lays it against the pattern. A second passes, then a third. She exhales finally and picks up the chalk. You'd think cutting fabric would be a relatively simple affair, but silk, you're learning, is fussy. It slips, it bunches, it frays if you so much as look at it wrong. And if the pattern isn't aligned with the weave's direction, good luck. You'll end up with a sleeve that hangs like a wet dish rag and a collar that thinks it's avant-garde. So the tailor begins by pinning the pattern weights, smooth stones wrapped in silk thread, laid precisely so the fabric doesn't wander. Mainstream accounts of Song dynasty tailoring mention that workshops like this one use both standardized garment shapes and custom designs depending on the client's status. Common robes followed formulaic cuts, T-shapes with flat panels and modest sleeves, while those for the elite might include sloping shoulders, widened hems, or exaggerated cuffs to display more embroidery. And here's where things get quirky. Tailors often made miniature paper versions of the full garment before even touching the real silk. Origami prototypes, essentially. One wrong fold in paper was better than ruining 12 tails worth of imperial brocade. The tailor you're watching doesn't need a paper model today. Her fingers move with the kind of confidence that comes from decades of repetition. She glances at the chalk lines one more time, then lifts a blade so sharp you can hear it breathe. The cut is made in one long stroke. Silent, clean, final. There's no going back now. You feel it in your gut, the way one does when watching a magician pull off the final flourish. She doesn't even flinch. Nearby, apprentices are preparing lining fabric, lighter silk, often plain-coloured, to protect the outer layer and offer warmth or structure. They iron it over hot stones, smoothing creases with thin bamboo paddles. One of them, a boy barely older than 13, mumbles a verse under his breath as he works. You catch the last line. To cut is to promise. It's a saying around here, apparently. You like it. There's a weight in that phrase that matches the mood. Across the room, a design assistant unfurls a scroll containing measurement records. Each entry is detailed with a name, date, purpose of garment, and unique adjustments. Some even list the wearer's rank and zodiac animal. You ask why that matters. The assistant shrugs and points to a robe marked for a general born in the year of the tiger. Longer sleeves makes him feel powerful, she says, deadpan. You don't know if she's serious. You also kind of hope she is. The cutting process isn't just about carving cloth, it's about predicting movement. The tailors study how a person walks, sits, bows, even how they sweat. Silk changes shape slightly in different climates, so lighter robes meant for the southern regions are cut with extra room under the arms and longer back hems to allow for sweat evaporation. Winter garments, by contrast, often include hidden seams to tuck in extra padding. No one wants a shivering scholar collapsing mid-poem recital. That's bad aesthetics. One elderly tailor beckons you over and shows you a bolt of damask dyed in crushed safflower and tea ash. The pattern is faint, almost like a watermark, visible only in the right light. This is for mourning garments, he murmurs. We cut it in silence. You nod, instinctively lowering your voice. There's a respect here that goes beyond tradition. It's an almost spiritual reverence for the role clothing plays in the rituals of grief. Historians still debate whether such mourning silks were truly standardized across regions or if local customs added their own layers of meaning. Either way, you feel the hush settle into your bones. Then there's the measuring process itself. A dance of fabric and numbers, done with cords, not metal rulers. The tailor takes a length of knotted silk cord and uses it to gauge a sleeve's arc. There's a mathematical charm in the fluidity. The human body isn't straight lines. It's curves, muscles, breath. And so the tools here aren't rigid. They stretch like time, like intention. In one corner, two journeymen are arguing softly over a neckline curve. They've each cut practice swatches and are now debating whether a half-inch more would make the robe dignified or sloppy. You listen as they quote famous tailors like philosophers. One swears by the 8-cloud curve, a sweeping dip that flatters long necks. The other says it makes people look like startled egrets. You don't weigh in, you're just impressed by how passionately they care. Your attention drifts back to the master tailor, who's begun to assemble the pieces she cut. No sewing yet, that comes later, but she lays them out like a puzzle on a large board. Sleeve, bodice, panel, gusset. They don't look like a garment yet, more like a map, or a promise. Before you leave, she places a finished robe in your hands. It's not a commission, it's a teaching piece. You hold it up and realise it's reversible. The outside is dyed black with silver embroidery, but the inside, deep maroon, patterned with ink-stamped clouds. For officials who serve during mourning, she explains, grief outside, joy inside. You swallow, it's strangely moving. She folds it with practiced grace and sets it aside. Next, she calls to the room, and just like that the studio breathes again. Snips, whispers, chalk dust and silk stretching into the next shape. You step outside with a lingering thought. Silk may start with the worm, but somewhere between dye and blade it becomes human. By now, you're starting to realise the Song Dynasty Silk Workshop isn't just a place, it's a living organism. Each building you enter feels like another chamber of a great breathing body. And the next chamber is the heart of the finishing process. This is where silk garments are stitched, detailed, pressed and, crucially, inspected before they're deemed worthy of wearing, or, in some cases, offered to the court or temple. You step inside and are greeted by a soft, rhythmic sound, thread pulling taut through fabric. Dozens of tailors, mostly women, sit cross-legged at low tables, needles flashing through silk like tiny lightning bolts. The air smells faintly of camphor wood, used to deter bugs that would love to snack on silk, just as much as emperors love to wear it. Some of the tailors hum while they work, quiet, lulling tunes that sound like songs half-remembered from childhood. Here, the robes begin to look like themselves. The pieces from the cutting studio arrive bundled like offerings, sleeves here, collars there, long front panels carefully marked with chalk lines. The stitchers open them like gifts and set to work. You kneel beside one woman who's sewing an elaborate underrobe using a technique called jianshu. Fine, close stitches nearly invisible from the front. You squint. You still can't see them. It's like silk is being convinced to fuse with itself. Don't blink, she teases, without looking up. You try not to. But she's right. Blink, and you miss it. Stitching silk is not like stitching wool or linen. The fabric shifts like a cat, beautiful but uninterested in cooperation. So they use curved needles, beeswaxed thread, and stitch in short bursts to avoid puckering. There's a rule, no tugging. Silk doesn't like drama. You pass one row of tailors focused solely on linings, their work hidden once the outer robes are completed. But they know their value. Lining speaks to character, one says, half laughing. A robe with a sloppy inside is a robe with secrets. You're pretty sure that's either a Confucian proverb or something someone's grandma used to say during dumpling night. Either way, it lands. Along one wall, an older man is working on fastenings. You expect buttons or ties, but no, he's making panku, those exquisite knotted frog closures. His hands twist silk cords into loops and swirls that look like little dragons curling in on themselves. You ask how long he's been doing this. Since before my teeth fell out, he replies with a grin. He still has teeth, by the way, he's just flexing. Nearby, a group of apprentices crowd around a table where one of the master embroiderers is applying the final decorative flourishes to a ceremonial sash. This isn't your grandma's chain stitch. This is Sioux embroidery, one of the finest in China. The detail is astonishing, tiny cranes mid-flight, every feather shaded with 3 types of white thread. The sash itself is no wider than your forearm, but the artistry is like something from a painting scroll. She lets you hold it. It's heavier than expected, not just from the thread, but from the layers of intention stitched into every inch. You can't help but wonder how many garments from this room have ended up in tombs, preserved under centuries of silence. Some song silk fragments discovered in archaeological digs still show traces of ink and gold. There's one record of a brocade scrap found wrapped around the bones of a flute player, folded neatly like a final lullaby. One floorboard creaks and you follow the sound to another corner of the room, a quieter alcove where quality inspectors work. No embroidery, no stitching, no cutting, just eyes, fingers, and an intimidating level of scrutiny. The lead inspector, a woman with calloused hands and an ink brush tucked behind her ear, beckons you over. Before her lies a robe, a simple scholar's design in pale blue. She holds a square magnifying lens over the seam and frowns. You can't see the issue, but apparently it's there. She points to a thread that's twisted, not lying flat. Like a crooked phrase in a poem, she mutters. Then she marks it with red chalk. Back it goes. There's a grading scale here, you learn. First class, second class, third. Only first-class robes leave this room with the workshop's red wax seal, a stylised lotus pressed into lacquer. Robes that don't meet the mark are either repaired, repurposed into household items, or, in rare cases, burned. Yes, burned. It's rare, but it happens. A silk robe too flawed to sell, but too beautiful to degrade into pillowcases. Into the flame it goes. Something about dignity or vengeance, or both. One of the inspectors explains the difference between types of thread used in seams versus those used in decorative top stitching. Seam threads are twisted tight for durability, while top threads are looser and sometimes even doubled to catch the light. Every stitch has its mood, she says. You begin to think silk is more emotionally intelligent than most people. Quirky fact of the day. One tailor confesses she adds a single black stitch in an otherwise red hem for every garment she makes. No one can see it unless they turn the robe inside out and squint. But it's her signature, like a hidden wink. Apparently she once stitched her own name in microscopic characters under the collar of a robe that ended up worn by a provincial governor. She never got caught. Legend. A bell rings softly near the door, signalling the hour. Some workers stretch their arms, some pause to rethread needles, but there's no rush to leave. The room hums with that rare energy found only in places where people like their work. Not love, maybe, but respect. You can sense it in how they fold the robes when they finish. A kind of ceremonial reverence, even if the garment is destined for someone's very normal, very sweaty cousin. By the time you leave, a small stack of finished robes has been laid out for pressing and folding. They shine like still water. You're handed one to carry, carefully, like you're holding a baby, or a wine bottle in someone else's expensive carpeted house. You cross into the next chamber, cradling the robe, and can already smell what's coming. Incense and hot stone, a final ritual before silk becomes life. The robe in your arms is still warm from the hands that made it, and now you carry it into what might be the quietest room in the entire workshop complex. It's not silence like the hush of a library. It's the stillness of something ancient, practiced, and almost sacred. Welcome to the pressing and folding studio, where each silk garment is prepared for delivery, storage, or, if it's truly special, ceremonial presentation. The floor here is covered in woven rush mats, and the air is faintly scented with cedar, pine resin, and the delicate smoke of incense coils slowly spiralling down from the ceiling rafters. You step in and immediately feel a difference in temperature. It's warmer than outside, but not oppressive. That's thanks to the heated stone slabs placed throughout the room, large, flat, smooth surfaces warmed from underneath by charcoal braziers. They radiate a gentle, consistent heat, like warm stones placed under your blanket in winter. This is where the robe you carry will be pressed, gently coaxed into perfection. A woman gestures for you to place it on the central slab. Her hands are stained from handling herbs and wax, and she holds a brush with what looks like horsehair bristles. You pass her the robe like a baby bird, and she lays it down on the warm stone with a fluid motion, smoothing it out with practiced sweeps of her palm. No steam presses here, no electric irons, just warmth, gravity, and time. Pressing isn't about crushing the fabric, it's about relaxing it. letting it remember its shape. The brush she uses is dipped in lightly scented water infused with camellia oil and alum, which helps coax the silk into obedient smoothness. A few strokes, a few minutes of rest, and already the creases begin to ease. One of the artisans sits nearby, preparing what looks like a tiny pillow filled with rice husks. She explains quietly that they use these to weigh down collars and hems while they cool, keeping the shape from warping. They're not just finishing garments, they're teaching them how to behave. You watch as another robe is lifted from its pressing board and placed onto a folding mat. And here begins the true art, the fold. Song dynasty folding techniques were about more than just practicality. Every fold had a reason, preservation, aesthetics and symbolism. Robes were never simply folded in half and tossed aside. Instead, they were pleated gently along the seams, with inner linings protected, and collars wrapped over softly like a sleeping hand over a heart. One mainstream historical account describes how garments for officials were folded in sets of threes, 3 vertical, 3 horizontal, as a nod to the harmony between heaven, earth and humanity. In quirky detail, some robes had tiny stitched cues sewn into their linings, almost invisible, to guide the folding sequence, like embroidery cheat codes. You spot one now, a row of minute red dots near the shoulder seam. If you weren't lying half asleep and staring way too intently, you might have missed it. An elder artisan begins folding a robe meant for temple donation. The process is slow, meditative. Fold, smooth, press, fold again. She pauses to centre the embroidered lotus on the front panel. Not because anyone's likely to see it right away. It'll be wrapped, boxed, maybe even stored for weeks before use, but because details matter. She murmurs a prayer under her breath. May the wearer be steady in heart, swift in mind. It's not required. It's habit. You notice they're folding according to fabric weight too. Heavier brocades are layered to rest outward, keeping pressure off fine embroidery. Light summer silks are rolled around a parchment tube first to prevent creasing. Some robes are even dusted lightly with powdered silk floss to maintain luster. It's like a spa day for garments. As you watch, someone walks in carrying a bundle wrapped in oiled paper. It's a return. A noble's robe, apparently worn once, is back for repressing before it's stored in a family chest. The artisan opens the bundle like it's a secret letter and inspects it for damage. None, but a faint tea stain along the inside collar? A bit too much celebratory wine at someone's poetry night. The artisan just sighs, chuckles, and makes a note on a small bamboo slip. Mild misbehaviour, she writes, deadpan. You sense she's seen worse. As the robe is cleaned and prepped again, you learn that these finishing rooms also act as informal storytellers. Garments return with evidence of life. Loose threads, perfume traces, sandalwood oil at the wrists from prayer sessions, or, once, someone claims, white dog hair stuck in a lining destined for the capital. A mutt in the magistrate's lap, someone mutters. Bold dog. Over in a quiet alcove, someone's painting storage boxes with ink patterns. Each box is labelled not with the owner's name, but with a symbolic glyph or motif. Mountain, crane, cloud, pine. The idea is poetic privacy. You don't write Governor Lynn's winter robe. You write North Wind hidden in pines. Much classier. And now comes the ceiling. Garments ready for long-distance delivery are wrapped in mulberry paper, tied with braided silk cords, and sealed with red wax bearing the workshop's emblem, usually a plum blossom or stylized wheel. If you're wondering, yes, it is considered very bad luck to break the seal prematurely. One tale even insists a robe's silk started fraying spontaneously after someone tampered with a seal during transit. Historians tend to shrug this one off, but hey, historians also still debate whether certain seal motifs indicated seasonal use or just brand loyalty. It's probably both. Silks like that, fussy and fashionable. As you help an artisan place a finished bundle onto a delivery tray, you realise how many hands have touched each robe. Spinners, dyers, cutters, stitchers, folders, sealers. It's not a product. It's a story sewn from 100 quiet decisions, some humble, some monumental, all important. You sit down for a moment on one of the rush mats, rubbing your palms over the grain of the weave, and glance at the ceiling. The incense is almost burned out now, trailing a lazy ribbon of smoke through a beam of afternoon sun. The warmth from the heated stones sinks through your legs and makes you feel heavier, in a good way, like gravity is finally on your side. Before you leave, a young apprentice slips you a folded scrap of silk pressed and sealed, no bigger than a coin. For memory, she says. You unfold it slowly. It's sky blue, soft as fog and blank. A quiet promise, maybe. Or a souvenir from a daydream. Then behind you, a door opens to the outer courtyard. Time for the delivery carts. The outer courtyard hums with a different sort of energy. Less whispery reverence, more cheerful coordination. You step into a patch of warm sun, blinking against the brightness as your eyes adjust. The space is open but efficiently arranged, like a stage set for an elaborate daily performance. Wooden carts line the edges, their wheels greased and gleaming. Stacks of folded silk robes and accessories, all wrapped in paper and tied with silk cord, sit in neat columns like sleepy soldiers ready for inspection. You weren't expecting such a relaxed vibe. A few workers are laughing as they strap bundles into the carts. One hums a tune that might be a rice planting song repurposed for a robe loading. A rooster struts across the flagstones, entirely unimpressed with the artistry that has unfolded behind closed doors. You give it a respectful nod anyway. The lead cartmaster, a wiry man with weather-tough skin and a silk scarf tied around his neck like a badge of personal flair, waves you over. His cart is destined for Hangzhou's inner city, where several high-status clients await their orders. You glance at the bundles and spot a red wax seal you watched being pressed not even an hour ago. Somehow it already feels like an old friend. "Ride with us if you like," he offers, patting the wrench beside him. You climb up the wood warm from the sun. As the cart creaks into motion, he flicks the reins and murmurs something to the oxen that sounds more like gossip than instruction. They seem to understand. You pass through the outer gates of the workshop and onto a road bordered by bamboo and swaying trees. The sun filters through the leaves, casting fluttering patterns on the silk bundles. The breeze smells faintly of river water and dried herbs. "Careful with the bumps," he says, not because of the road, but because silk remembers. If you jostle a garment too much, especially freshly pressed, it may crinkle in protest. The solution? Strategic placement of weight. Rice husk cushions between stacks and a few fragrant sachets tucked in for good measure. Like a very fashionable game of Tetris. As the cart trundles along, the cartmaster tells you the deliveries are more than just drop-offs. Sometimes he's asked to wait and return with adjustments. Hem too long, sleeves too wide, or a decorative pattern that doesn't quite match the recipient's favourite fan. Yes, that picky. And he swears one time a lady sent a robe back because it made her feel melancholy. No fixing that with a stitch. Historians still debate whether tailors had any power to refuse these last-minute whims. Some records suggest a polite but firm no was acceptable, particularly for pieces with court approval. Others claim workshops bent over backwards to accommodate client moods, especially during festival season. The truth probably falls somewhere in between, like a silk sash over a too-tight collar, smoothed out in practice, if not in theory. Your cart pulls into the edge of the city. The shift in atmosphere is subtle, but unmistakable. The clink of teacups, the distant trill of a flute, the chatter of market stalls. The cartmaster pauses to present a delivery at the outer gates of a merchant compound. A servant inspects the wax seal, nods, and disappears into the courtyard. Moments later he returns with a lacquered token, proof of receipt, engraved with the household sigil. It looks like a moon caught behind clouds. Poetic. You pocket it like a relic from a game you didn't realise you were playing. At the next stop things get more interesting. The robe being delivered is a custom order, and the client insists on inspecting it personally. She arrives in a swirl of lavender perfume and gentle authority, her sleeves trailing like water. She unwraps the robe with delicate fingers, eyes flicking over the embroidery with the precision of someone who's definitely taken a magnifying lens to brocade before. A slow nod. The cloud pattern is acceptable. she says, as if clouds were employees. Then she asks your opinion. You hesitate. Say something vague about the collar being confident. She raises an eyebrow, then smiles. Apparently that was the correct answer. As you travel to the final stop, a local temple, you're surprised to find that silk deliveries there are handled with just as much precision. The robes offered to temples aren't worn. They're draped over statues, displayed on ceremonial stands, or folded and stored as spiritual offerings. You unload the bundles with care, noting the embroidered dragons and lotus patterns that seem to shimmer with something more than just skill. One monk steps forward, offering tea to the cart master and you. You sit under a shaded awning, sipping from warm porcelain as he speaks softly about the importance of textiles in ritual. Silk is chant, he says, but it holds memory. When offered with good intention, it becomes part of the prayer. You glance at the robe he's laying over a carved altar, and it looks right, like it was always meant to be there. You head back with an empty cart except for a single package, a robe returned for adjustment. The note tied to it reads, "Sleeves a hair too long, kindly trim the moonlight." You don't even blink. On the way back, you spot a roadside vendor selling snacks, steamed buns, candied walnuts, roasted chestnuts and folded bamboo leaves. The cartmaster tosses you a warm bun. For the ride. It's stuffed with sweet bean paste and soft as a pillow. Probably the second softest thing you've touched today. Back at the workshop courtyard, twilight begins to pool in the corners. The last carts return, wheels crunching softly over the gravel. Deliveries done, robes received, adjustments logged. Another cycle complete. Someone lights the courtyard lanterns, paper globes that swing gently in the evening breeze. Workers trickle out from the various halls and studios, their hands ink-stained, wax-smudged, or simply tired. There's no formal bell or grand announcement, just a shared sense that the day has tipped gently into its quiet phase. One apprentice invites you to join the folding of tomorrow's work orders. You sit beneath a lantern, legs crossed, helping arrange bamboo slips marked with the next day's commissions. As you trace your fingers over the etched characters, summer robe, elderberry dye, lotus collar, you realise you can almost picture the finished garment already. That's the strange magic of this place. It teaches you to see a robe not just as cloth, but as a process, a map, a memory, a mood. You rise as the last of the carts is wheeled into storage. The cartmaster gives you a lazy salute, then disappears into the night. And now, somewhere in the compound, the faint scent of evening tea and sesame oil drifts through the air. You follow the scent of tea through a narrow breezeway, where shadows stretch long and the stone tiles under your feet hold the day's warmth like a fading secret. The buildings here are quieter, their walls lined with bamboo screens that rustle as if whispering in your direction. This is the inspection archive, a small but deeply important corner of the workshop. Not exactly glamorous, but make no mistake, this is where silk gets remembered. Inside, it's all cool air and soft footsteps. Rows of lacquered shelves climb the walls, filled not with robes but with records. Rolls of parchment, stacks of bamboo slips, stitched paper books, each containing precise handwritten descriptions of garments long finished and long gone. It's not just about documentation, it's about legacy. Think of it as the silk world's version of your search history, only with better handwriting. You're ushered in by a quiet woman with ink-stained fingertips. She barely looks up from her desk, where she's carefully copying the dye composition of a robe delivered last month. Mulberry silk, elderberry and gardenia bath, triple rinse, she murmurs, transcribing the details in a neat rhythmic script. You lean over her shoulder just slightly, not too much. This is sacred ground, after all. She gestures to an open book on the table next to her. Inside is an illustration, not quite art, not quite blueprint, of a garment. It's delicately painted with mineral pigment ink, showing the full pattern, thread types and trim placement. To the side there's a small swatch of actual silk glued to the page. You reach toward it instinctively, and she smacks your hand away gently. Preservation, she says, and returns to her writing. These books aren't just logs, they're recipes, formulas for recreating perfection or learning from failure. Every robe that passes through the quality control workshop is documented in at least 3 places: the design registry, the dye ledger, and the visual archive. And yes, someone is in charge of making sure those all agree. That someone, the master archivist, who arrives now in a cloud of sandalwood and the air of someone who has never, ever forgotten a deadline. He takes one look at you and smiles like he's reading the inside of your thoughts. "First visit," he says. You nod. "Good. You'll help with the inspection samplers. Before you can protest, he hands you a lacquered tray containing small squares of silk, each from a robe recently delivered. There are the backup samples, snipped from the cloth edges before tailoring, preserved in case a remake is needed. Or if someone years later wants to know exactly what early spring rain blue was supposed to look like. You help him lay them out under a lantern, comparing each to its logbook. Are the colours true? Is the grain consistent? Did the gold thread oxidize weirdly? Yes, that happened once. No, they still don't know why. One sample catches your eye. It has a strange shimmer, almost like it's been woven with mother of pearl. You ask about it, and the archivist shrugs. Experimental technique. Came from a coastal dye house. They used powdered oyster shell. You blink. That's a choice. He chuckles. Smelled terrible. Looked divine. These archives are also home to workshop gossip, preserved with more tact than you'd expect. See that line in the margin? Client requested repeat pattern, requested 3 times. Translation. That robe sparked a small obsession. Another note reads, colour appeared darker when worn under moonlight. Possible oversaturation of indigo. A quiet mystery, filed away like a crime scene report. Silk noir. One scroll is more worn than the others, edges curled like old parchment. The archivist unrolls it for you, revealing a registry from the early years of the Song dynasty. Some of the robes listed were made for palace officials. One in particular has a crimson mark beside it, not a wax seal, but a fingerprint in cinnabar ink. The emperor approved this one himself, the archivist whispers. You lean closer. The fingerprint is still vivid. That robe is long gone, probably dust, but here it's eternal. Historians still debate how centralised these archives really were. Some say every major workshop kept full records. Others think detailed archiving was reserved for those serving elite clients or working in court-sponsored guilds. Either way, the obsession with detail was real. Paper might have been cheaper than silk, but it was treated with the same reverence. You're led deeper into the archive where the lighting dims to protect older inks. Here, the walls are lined with cedar drawers, each containing something called a feel map. It's exactly what it sounds like. A long strip of stitched silk, documenting fabric texture across different stages of the dye and finish process. You run your fingers gently across one labelled snow silk. It's so smooth it makes your fingertips question reality. Then, tucked in the corner of the room, you find a tiny shelf marked rejections. Not failures exactly, just robes that never found the right moment. Misaligned patterns, embroideries that ran slightly off-centre, a rare wrong tone in the gold thread. Each has its record, its swatch, its story. One is marked with a single phrase, too perfect, felt unnatural. You love it instantly. Before you go, the archivist hands you a strip of soft paper and a brush. Make a note, he says. Anything, just add to the memory. You hesitate, then write, blue as the forgotten sky. He nods like he understands exactly what you mean. You leave the archive slower than you entered, as though the weight of all those stories lingers on your shoulders. Outside, the evening deepens. Lantern light flickers against the clay tiles. Somewhere someone strikes a chime to signal supper. A low bell rings 3 times. The workday, it seems, is officially ending. You follow the sound of the bell through the garden path, your footsteps softened by the moss that creeps up the flagstones. Evening has officially settled over the silk workshop, and with it comes a change in rhythm. Slower, warmer, steeped in the gentle routines that only exist at the tail end of a long, meticulous day. You find yourself at the communal eating hall, tucked behind a stand of bamboo that rattles like dry laughter in the breeze. The hall is humble, with broad wooden beams overhead and low tables arranged to encourage elbow-bumping camaraderie. The scent drifting from the open-air kitchen is nothing short of hypnotic. Ginger, scallions, soy, and that sweet tinge of fermented bean paste that always promises something good. An older weaver waves you over with chopsticks. You look like you've stared at too many swatches, she jokes, scooting over to make room. You sit, and within moments a small bowl of congee and pickled vegetables appears in front of you, followed by a dish of steamed egg with sesame oil. Nothing fancy, but the flavours are calm and homey, exactly the culinary equivalent of a well-washed linen robe. The conversation flows as gently as the tea. You overhear a debate about thread gauges between two junior dyers who are arguing over whether a robe from earlier that day used a triple twist filament or just a very smug double. Nearby, someone hums a folk song, off-key but content. The loom master sits cross-legged in the corner, carving a bamboo shuttle absent-mindedly while chatting with the grain steward. Everyone, it seems, has multiple side quests. You sip a second cup of tea, oolong floral, the kind that almost tastes like silk itself, and the weaver beside you starts telling stories. "Did you hear about the robe they made with beetle wings?" she asks. You haven't. You raise an eyebrow. She continues, "True story. They crushed iridescent beetles and used the powder in the embroidery. Shimmered like a dragonfly's laughter. Beautiful, completely impractical, a nightmare to wash." You chuckle, but she's not done. And once a high official asked for a robe so stiff it could stand up on its own. Had to be stored with sticks in the sleeves. Poor guy couldn't sit down without sounding like a folding screen. This is where silk lore lives. Not in the archives, not even in the robes themselves, but in these stories, exchanged between bites of rice and sips of tea. The workshop may produce perfection, but dinner is where its soul lives. Eventually plates are cleared, and a few of the workers drift toward the courtyard. You follow, guided by the low strum of a peeper being tuned by a young apprentice whose other job is adjusting hemlines. "She plays better than she sews," someone teases, but only just. You find a seat on the edge of a low stone bench, the music curling into the air like steam. It's a soft tune, nothing formal or courtly, just a drifting melody with pauses long enough to let the stars peek through. One of the wax sealers starts tapping along with a spoon on a ceramic bowl, and within moments, the courtyard becomes a sleepy little concert. By now, the moon is up, casting silver light that makes the silk robes glow faintly where they hang from the workshop rails. Someone points and jokes. Even off duty, they want attention. You suspect they're not wrong. The weaver who sat beside you earlier returns with a small lamp and a bundle of thread. She begins knotting strands into a bracelet. Silk, of course, dyed from leftover rouge thread used in a wedding robe last month. "For luck," she says, handing it to you without ceremony. "Silk remembers." That again. You begin to understand why it's repeated so often around here. It's not just cloth. It's memory. It's continuity. A wearable ghost of effort and care. You tie the bracelet on your wrist, the knot small but precise. Nearby, a scholar from the city arrives with a scroll of poetry seeking feedback from the weavers. This is apparently a tradition, word workers and thread workers swapping metaphors. The poem is about clouds shaped like longing. The hemstitcher rolls her eyes and replies, "Should have used linen." There's laughter. The scholar scribbles furiously, not offended, just amused. Collaboration comes in many flavours. As the night deepens, people begin to peel away in ones and twos. Some return to small side rooms for evening meditation. Others head toward dormitories tucked behind vine-covered walls. You stay a little longer, watching the moon rise higher. Its light pools like ink on rice paper, soft and slow. Eventually, even the courtyard quiets. The pipa player lets the last note hang for a while, then places the instrument back in its case, wrapped in a faded yellow cloth. She bows slightly to no one in particular and vanishes down a hallway. You make your way to the guest quarters, guided by a lantern hung from a hook shaped like a cloud. Inside, the room is simple but serene. Matte floor, low wooden bed, a folded quilt dyed pale lavender. There's a basin of warm water for your hands, a bamboo comb, and a small sachet of dried chrysanthemum on the pillow. Your fingers brush it, and the scent unfurls like a sigh. You settle onto the bed, pulling the quilt over your legs. The window is left slightly open to let in the summer night air. Crickets sing outside. You stare up at the wooden ceiling and realise, no clocks, no tick-tock, just silk, stories, stars. And then there's a soft knock. It's the weaver again, now holding a silk scrap with strange marks drawn on it in charcoal. "Dream map," she says. "We draw them when we sleep and try to match them to tomorrow's patterns." You blink, unsure if she's joking. She might be, or not. Either way, she hands it to you. Try it. Who knows, the fabric might remember. She leaves without another word, and you lie there, holding a scrap of silk in one hand, your wrist wrapped with a thread dyed from someone's love story. There's no moral here, no lesson, just texture. You wake to the sound of morning bells, soft and distant, like a memory trying to return. The room is bathed in a grey, pre-dawn light, the kind that doesn't announce itself, just quietly arrives. You stretch under the lavender quilt, the scent of dried chrysanthemum still faintly rising from the pillow. The dream map lies beside you on the matte floor, its charcoal swirls oddly comforting, as if sleep itself left you a note. The courtyard is already alive when you emerge, hair a little messy, eyes still half closed. No one judges. In a place where perfection is handmade, everyone's allowed to look a little unfinished first thing in the morning. Your guide from yesterday, the woman who gave you the bracelet, waves you toward a small corner of the workshop grounds. Today, she says with a smile, you learn about the fail-safes. The term feels vaguely ominous. You follow her across the compound to a side building lined with covered porches. This is where robes come when something doesn't go to plan. Not outright failures, mind you, but anomalies, eccentricities, little acts of silk rebellion. A gold thread that buckled, a dye that shifted overnight from plum to mulberry, a sleeve that turned mysteriously asymmetric during final steaming. Inside, the walls are lined with narrow pegs, each holding a robe encased in muslin. One by one, these garments are unwrapped and studied like cryptic letters. You're introduced to the correction master, a quiet, detail-obsessed man with spectacles so tiny they seem to be held in place by sheer concentration. His job? Fix what can be fixed, forgive what can't. Today he's working on a robe meant for a court musician. The embroidery on the hem, which was supposed to represent plum blossoms, somehow now resembles, not unpleasantly, tiny, angry cats. The stitching went too tight here, he explains, tapping a magnifier to the silk. Shifted the petal lines. Adorable, not correct. He sighs, then shrugs. Might become a house robe. In many workshops, this kind of mistake would be hidden or destroyed. Here, is documented, archived, sometimes even celebrated. Intent matters, the correction master says, but so does recovery. On one wall, a series of framed silk panels show before and after stories. A discoloured back panel, re-dyed into ombre brilliance, a scorched hemline turned into flame embroidery. Creativity here is often born of crisis. He leads you to the edge of the porch where long rods stretch between carved brackets. Draped across them are the so-called learning robes, pieces never meant for clients but made by apprentices to practice disaster recovery. You see one robe with mismatched sleeves, one pristine, the other frantically stitched and re-dyed 3 times. Another has a whole panel patched with a different weave, like a scar that learned to smile. The master picks one up and hands it to you. Try this, he says. Find the problem. You examine the silk. It seems perfect at first, smooth even, nicely finished. But as you move it in the light, you catch it. A warp thread that skipped 2 wefts. A flaw so small it feels like a whisper. You point to it. He nods once, like a sensei approving a kata. Of course, not every robe can be saved. Some are disassembled, the silk rewashed, the thread unpicked and rewound onto spools. You visit that area next, a sunlit room where women unmake robes like gentle archaeologists. One hums softly as she removes golden knots from a sleeve, placing each length of the thread into a bamboo tray. "We'll use this for neckline trims," she says without looking up. Another weaver nearby is unspooling dye-muddied thread onto a frame, her hands careful not to snag. She notices you watching and shrugs. "It's not glamorous," she says, "but nothing's wasted." She gestures to a nearby basket filled with thread remnants, tiny silk tufts, and even shredded muslin wraps. They'll be rewoven into training cloths. Even the trimmings learn something. Then there's the test robe wall, a curious little stretch of fabric panels that look like patchwork, but are actually tightly curated experiments. A panel showing how two nearly identical shades of blue reacted differently to winter dye baths. A strip of embroidery where one stitch tension made all the difference. Even a tiny square labelled "Silk plus lychee wine, a bad idea." You nod solemnly, noted. A young apprentice, no older than 14, walks in carrying a bundle of something bundled in black silk. The correction master raises an eyebrow. The apprentice sighs. The sleeve trim shrank again. The master grimaces, opens the wrap and inspects the robe. "This is the third one," he mutters. "Get the steamer, and pray." He turns to you. "Want to help?" Before you can politely decline, you're handed a steamer wand. You follow instructions to gently pass it over the silk, watching as the threads relax like tense shoulders. The hem settles, the wrinkle gives in, a tiny miracle coaxed out with warm air and patience. "Not perfect," the master says when it's done, "but ready." You leave the correction room with a quiet respect for everything that almost wasn't, but became something anyway. Outside, the sun has climbed, casting angled shadows across the courtyard. You pass a delivery cart headed out through the front gate, bearing 2 sealed chests tied with crimson cord. Today's finished robes, bound for clients you'll never meet. Inside those chests, weeks of measuring, dyeing, sewing, checking, steaming, correcting and dreaming. Silk doesn't just remember, it evolves. You walk back toward the main workshop, passing by the old loom hall. A young girl is threading a shuttle with silver thread, her tongue poking out slightly in the concentration. She looks up, sees you watching, and offers a grin. "My pattern came out crooked yesterday," she says. "I'm fixing it." You nod, as if that explains everything. And in a place like this, it kind of does. You spend the late morning exploring the smallest corners of the compound, the kinds of nooks that don't get mentioned in imperial records or grand historical scrolls. These are the slow pockets of space where silk happens in between the headlines. Places like the thread-drying garden, for example. It's hidden behind the steaming hut, shaded by a lattice of gourds and creeping morning glory. Dozens of fine silk threads, dyed and stretched taut across wooden racks, glisten in the sun like strings on an invisible zither. You stand there, hands behind your back like a well-behaved guest, watching a young dyer gently check the tautness of the lines, one by one, with a bamboo stick. She hums something you don't recognise, probably an old work chant passed down like a family secret. She nods in your direction but doesn't stop her rhythm. "If one of these snaps," she murmurs, "we have to start the dyeing all over again. Some people say it's bad luck. I think it's just silk, being honest." You walk on, circling around the main workshop building. It's hard to believe, but this place, with all its precision and elegance, still depends on things as fragile as mood, humidity and tea strength. A few workers sit under an awning, sipping jasmine tea and sorting thread cones into what you assume is a secret colour code. One laughs suddenly and points at a particularly bold red. "This one's widow's lipstick," she says. "Can't use it before autumn. Too much drama." The nomenclature of colours here is a story all its own. They're never just red or green or blue. They're names you can taste. Pickled plum, jade fog, winter mouth, dragon breath, and, your favourite so far, melon under moonlight. You take a moment to peek into the archive room, a low-ceilinged chamber lined with scrolls, samples and coded ledgers. This is where they document everything: how long a robe took to make, who dyed what thread came from which cocoon batch. It's all there, recorded in tight brush strokes on paper that smells faintly of resin and ink. One logbook has an entire entry about a robe rejected because the left sleeve absorbed rain during delivery and dried half a tone darker. The solution? Send a matching robe with a right sleeve in the same shade. It became a pair, the log notes, worn by two sisters, probably argued less that way. And then, in the corner of the archive room, you see something unexpected, a section labelled Notable Failures. The scrolls there are stored lovingly, not with shame but with a kind of affectionate eye roll. One is labelled The Invisible Robe Project, not actually invisible. Another reads 12-legged dragon, overzealous embroidery. You have to sit down for that one. A little later, a senior quality master finds you chuckling and raises an eyebrow. Failure is just a story in the middle of the robe, she says. You just haven't reached the good hem yet. Lunch is a quieter affair than yesterday's dinner. The midday sun is hot and lazy, and most of the compound moves like it's underwater. You sit on the edge of the dyeing pond, eating rice cakes with sesame paste and watching dragonflies skim the surface. Occasionally someone wanders by with a fabric roll or a steaming basket of mulberry leaves for the silkworms. Speaking of those tiny emperors, you stop by the silkworm house again, now open to visitors for the afternoon. The air inside is damp and leafy, and the worms are still munching with their hypnotic, never-ending chew. Keeper leans over and says, "One batch went on hunger strike last year. Too much noise. We had to read them poetry until they calmed down." You raise an eyebrow, but she just nods solemnly, as if this is completely standard protocol. Maybe it is. Then it's time for something special. You're allowed to observe one of the final fitting sessions. In a softly lit room near the front of the workshop, a noblewoman arrives to try on her custom robe. You stand quietly behind a wooden screen peeking through a carved lattice. She's elegant, composed, and not quite hiding her nerves. The robe, hung on a polished stand, gleams like a promise. It's a pale golden colour with embroidered chrysanthemums flowing along the hem and up one sleeve. You watch as the fitters lift the robe with reverence, folding it over her shoulders, adjusting the collar, the belt, the fall of the sleeves. The head tailor steps in, his brow furrowed in professional concern. "Sleeve needs a quarter twist," he mutters. Two assistants step forward to rotate the seam, and then it fits perfectly. You can feel it in the air like the room itself exhales. The noblewoman turns, catches sight of herself in the polished bronze mirror, and smiles. Not the polite kind, something deeper. It's a moment of pure connection between human and cloth, between intention and execution. You glance down at your own sleeve, plain by comparison, but you suddenly feel very well dressed. As the noblewoman steps out, she passes by the screen and nods in your direction. You nod back, suddenly unsure of who's more honoured in that exchange. Outside, the workers are beginning to prepare the robe for delivery, packed in a cedarwood chest with muslin wraps and 3 sachets of dried camphor. A charm is tied around the handle for safe passage. Everything is so ritualised. Even departure is part of the craft. The loom master passes by and gestures toward the chest. "Each robe is a little temple," he says. "You pray to it, you argue with it, and eventually it forgives you." You look back toward the workshop at the layers of history stitched into every doorway and dye vat. It's not a museum. It's not even a factory. It's more like a theatre where every thread has a role, every mistake has a subplot, and every robe ends up being more than just clothing. And as you stand in the courtyard with the scent of silk and cedar in the air, a strange thought crosses your mind. You don't really want to leave. You linger in the courtyard as dusk settles like a silken shawl draped over the workshop's shoulders, and lanterns wink to life one by one, paper globes glowing like suspended moons. You move slowly between them, each pool of light revealing a new detail. The the delicate lattice of shadows on the flagstones, the faint sheen of oil where water dripped from a recently pressed robe, the curl of a stray silk filament caught on a reed screen. You breathe in the mingled scents of cedar, camphor and cooling stone, and let your mind drift over the day's tapestry of textures and tales, each thread a memory stitched into the fabric of your experience. Ahead, the finishing pavilion's paper windows radiate a warm amber glow. Beyond them, the last tailors are sealing wax on a ceremonial sash, their figures dancing in silhouette like ancient puppets. You sense the hush in their movements, the same hush that fell over the reeling vats this morning, the soft exhale that followed every tight inspection, the quiet reverence in the folding room. It's a silence not of absence but of full attention, the weight of care stitched into every seam. You pause by a low bench where the day's waste threads have been gathered and repurposed into practice bundles. Each skein, dyed and twisted just so, waits for the next apprentice to learn salvage artistry. You run your fingertips along one, the twist of colour reminding you that nothing here is truly wasted. Even fibres deemed unfit have their own afterlives, as scrap as training cloth, or even as the secret signature in a tailor's hidden stitch. Quirky as it sounds, one senior stitcher confessed that she once wove the remnants of a failed pattern into a tapestry reserved for the workshop's private altar, believing every flaw held a lesson. Across the courtyard, a group of dyers hover under a reed pergola, testing small samples against the moonlight. They hold up shards of silk to confirm how deep that pomegranate red truly is after dark, murmuring about colour that only reveals its soul by night. Historians still debate whether these nocturnal tests were widespread or confined to elite dye houses near the capital, but here they remain a cherished ritual, proof that silk is as much a living thing as any vine or petal. Lamplight flickers on the casting of tiny moulds used for button forms and manju-shaped fasteners. The craftsman leaves them to cool on a woven mat before noon tomorrow, when each will be precisely matched to its robe. You imagine the satisfaction of slipping one such button through its silk frog, the click of fit and finish echoing like a quiet triumph. Silk's journey, you realise, is not only horizontal from worm to robe, but vertical, climbing through layers of craft until every component hums with intention. You drift toward the storage hall where finished pieces rest in cedar chests, sealed against moths and time. Each chest is a promise of continuity, stamped with the workshop's emblem and tied with crimson cord. You lift the lid of one chest and let its scent unfurl, cedar and muslin and the faintest whisper of lotus oil from the dye vats. Within, a silk robe folds into itself like a butterfly in slumber, poised to awaken on the back of some future patron. Above you, lantern light glints off tiny moth-wing patterns, intentionally woven into a silk fragment tied to a doorpost, a ward against real moths. Fringe lore insists it confuses the insects scratching their tiny memories. Whether moths heed the trick or not, the ward stands as a testament to human imagination spun into every layer of this place. You settle on a low step, the warmth of the flagstone seeping through your clothes. In your lap, you cradle the embroidered brocade sample you've carried since Section 7. Its raised dragon scales, threaded with gilt, feel oddly alive under your palms, like a heartbeat you can't quite hear. You remember how the masters coaxed each scale into place, how the incense smoke curled around their chanting voices, how the sound of the bobbin's bell broke the water's hush. All those echoes mingle now, forming a single gentle symphony. Here, at the arc between night and tomorrow, you recognise the workshop's true achievement. It transforms raw potential into realised beauty, but it also transforms people. You, who began the day as a curious observer, now feel woven into the rhythm of this place. You carry its hush in your bones, its rituals in your breath, its delicate scars in your memory. A breeze stirs the lanterns, and you notice how the light shudders across the courtyard. Silk curtains sway, releasing a faint rustle that sounds almost like whispered thanks. You sense that tomorrow will come with its own uncertainties, a broken filament, a colour that surprises, a seam that demands correction. But you also know this: every flaw is part of the story, every challenge a chance for renewal. You rise, brushing off invisible fibres from your robes, and look once more at the lantern-lit halls. The workshop does not sleep. It simply rests, gathering its own quiet strength for the next dawn. You step forward, ready to carry its lessons beyond these walls. Now, dear listener, take a slow, deep breath as the evening vision of lantern-lit pavilions and whispered silk echoes settles gently around you. Imagine the pale glow of paper globes drifting above your head, their light soft as a lullaby, casting shadows that dance in time with your exhale. Feel the warmth of the smooth stone under your fingertips, the comforting memory of finely pressed robes folded with care, and the faint aroma of cedar and lotus blossoms weaving through the night air. Let your shoulders drop, releasing the tension you've carried as you recall the click of needles, the swirl of dyes, and the hush that wove through every workshop chamber today. Picture the slow turning of the foot pedals, the measured arc of a shuttle, and the precise flick of a master's wrist. Each movement a promise of continuity, each vapor a testament to patience. Allow the sense of quiet accomplishment to wash over you. You have walked through halls where artisans shaped nature's gift into garments of grace, where mistakes became masterpieces, and where every thread, no matter how small, found its place. As the world outside shifts and the lantern's glow mellows into the softest whisper of light, know that you too are part of this tapestry, woven into the indelible pattern of memory and human care. Tomorrow will bring new textures and rhythms, but for now, let the day's stories unfurl like gentle silk around your mind. Close your eyes and breathe in the serenity of a workshop at rest. The silk may remember. Let your dreams remember this calm. Sleep comes on feathered wings, and you are ready to drift into its embrace.